everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am here to do a bit of a different video in celebration of the historical fiction read-along which is happening this month, hosted by Katie over at Books and Things. I thought I would do a video where I basically do my historical fiction timeline, which I hope does what it says on the tin. I'm basically going through all of the historical fiction books that I've read, but talking about them in chronological order in terms of when they were set. Obviously not going to be delving too deep into the plots of any of these books because otherwise we would be here for hours, but I just thought this might be an interesting video. I think it's really interesting to look back on the chronology of your historical fiction and maybe have a look at any areas where you may have gaps to plug in, but also to see where it seems that your interest lies when it comes to historical eras. A couple of things that I am going to note here. Firstly, you will notice straight away that there are not any books that were written before Common Era on my list. Partially that's just because I've not read all that many books set BC, though that's not quite true because I have read a fair amount of Greek myth retelling, and that is exactly the reason why I'm not going to be including it. Purely because of the fact that for a lot of this Greek myth retelling that I have read, we can't pin down fairly definitively a time for it. Most of the Greek myth retelling that I read has been to do with the Trojan War, and not only do historians debate whether or not the Trojan War actually happened, but even when people do believe it happened, we can't pin it down to a small time period. There tends to be like a couple of centuries there that people tend to point to. And also the Trojan War retellings that I tend to read are usually to do with mythological figures like Agamemnon and Achilles and the Greek gods and goddesses. And where historians do debate over whether or not the war actually happened, I feel like there's universal agreement that a lot of these figures did not exist, if not all of them. Though for me, the year is the key thing for this. Rather than whether or not the person existed, the setting is what I'm interested in. So for example, the very first book that I'm going to be mentioning is a book which is retelling the death of Jesus, and I'm sure that people can debate about whether or not Jesus existed, whether or not the biblical story is real or not, but at least the author has given me a fair indication of when the book is set. There is at least like a 5 or 10 year period where that could be, and that's good enough for me. When it comes to the year, I am typically going to be going for the earliest date in the book, especially if it's like a long sweeping history. That being said, there will be some exceptions to this. For example, if the earliest date that is given is a bit of an anomaly, so for example, the majority of the book takes place in 1840, but there is a brief look back in 1799 or whatever, I'm most likely going to use 1840 because that is the main timeline. I hope that all makes sense. One thing to point out also is that I've got a small selection of classic books that I think would have been deemed historical fiction in their day. And it's not really an exhaustive list. You know, there are a lot of classics that I've read that are kind of vaguely set in the past. And I'm sure I've not included all of the classics that do have a set historical time period, but these were the ones that came to mind. Basically, the guideline that I had was that if an author had a clear historic date that was probably more than like 20 years prior to when they were writing, if they had a specific event in mind or focused on specific historical people, then I would include it. Like I say, this list is not going to be perfect, but hopefully it covers some gaps. And I hope that's everything that I had to say because I've got a lot of books to cover.
That was not all I wanted to cover. Editing Charlotte here to say that after I filmed this, I went back and I included all of the Shakespeare plays that I've read that deal with a historic time period or person, mainly because I've included classics and plays, and I felt like there was a bit of a mistake made in not including Shakespeare in the first place. Obviously, Shakespeare's plays are not the most truthful in their depiction of historic events, but that doesn't matter to me so much as the setting. So there we go, whether or not that was right or wrong, I've done it now. Haha! This choice now means that I do actually have books that were set before Common Era, so woo.
Let's get on with these books.
Coriolanus by William Shakespeare, Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, Antony and Cleopatra by William Shakespeare,
The Testament of Mary by Colm Tóibín, The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper, The Emperor's Babe by Bernardine Evaristo,
Macbeth by William Shakespeare,
Matrix by Lauren Groff, The Revolt by Clara Dupont Monod, The Outcasts of Time by Ian Mortimer, Hurdy-Gurdy by Christopher Wilson,
Richard II by William Shakespeare, Henry V by William Shakespeare,
Cecily by Annie Garthwaite,
Richard III by William Shakespeare,
The Hunchback of Notre Dame or Notre Dame de Paris by Victor Hugo, Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, Catherine of Aragon, The True Queen by Alison Weir, Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel, The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, The Marriage Game by Alison Weir, Rizzio by Denise Mina,
How to Stop Time by Matt Haig,
Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, The Familiars by Stacey Halls, The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton,
The Crucible by Arthur Miller,
The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V. Schwab, The Foundling by Stacey Halls, Love and Fury by Samantha Silver, The Intoxicating Mr. Lavelle by Neil Blackmore, Homegoing by Yog Yassi, The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower, Bone China by Laura Purcell, Pandora by Susan Stokes Chapman, Charlotte by Helen Moffat, The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow, Longbourn by Joe Baker, The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, Fanny by Rebecca F. John, The Good People by Hannah Kent, Middlemarch by George Eliot, The Wicked Cometh by Laura Carlin, Bellman in Black by Diane Setterfield, Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield, The Language of Food by Annabelle Abbs, Miss Austen by Jill Hornby, The Wonder by Emma Donoghue, The Master of Petersburg by J.M. Coetzee, Beloved by Toni Morrison, The Watchmaker of Filigree Street by Natasha Pulley, The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, Birdsong by Sebastian Folkes,
Journey's End by R.C. Sheriff, As Bright as Heaven by Susan Meissner,
The Silent Stars Go By by Sally Nichols, Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead,
The Diviners by Libba Bray,
To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Atonement by Ian McEwan, The Animals of Lockwood Manor by Jane Healey, The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak,
Good Night, Mr. Tom by Michelle Magorian,
The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas by John Boyne, The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris, Still Life by Sarah Winman,
Chocolate Cake with Hitler by Emma Craigie,
The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Schaffer and Annie Barrows, Brooklyn by Colm Tabine, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, The Reader by Bernard Schlink, On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan, Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie,
Silver Sparrow by Tiari Jones,
The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, Bitter Orange by Claire Fuller,
The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy,
The Final Revival of Opal and Nev by Dawnie Walton,
Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid,
Swan Song by Kaylee Greenberg Jeffcott, The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak, A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery, The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo, The Confession by Jessie Burton, Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rifka Brunt, and Mr. Pip by Lloyd Jones. So there we go. Those, I think, are all of the books that I've read that are historical fiction, or at least have a very tied down date where they were set. I have a number of lovely historical fiction books that are on my TBR that hopefully in a few years' time will be added into this timeline. I like the idea of going back to this and adding even more and more. Maybe not one to do every year, but every couple of years might be interesting. I'd love to see any of you do a similar video. I know for a fact that there are a lot of people who read vast amounts of historical fiction, much more than I do, for whom this video would be quite immense. But yeah, hope that you enjoyed this. Hope maybe it's given you some ideas and maybe some recommendations if there was, say, a medieval book or a Tudor book or a World War I book that you were interested in. Do let me know if any historical fiction that you recommend. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.